So Warren Smith, thank you so much for your time. We're at part 3, and I want you to continue to talk about how you would starting to build a curriculum after having students identify certain instruments and the musicians who are playing certain instruments, you know, identifying if it's Charlie Parker, if it's Dexter Gordon, and you had indicated that you would have students identify, you know, the different piano players, whether it's Art Tatum, Thelonious Monk, and I want you to continue that conversation.
Well, there weren't any African American studies programs in those days, all right?
And what year are we talking about?
Okay, let me see, 58, 59, the early 60s.
Right.
Yeah, maybe 1960 to 1966.
Right.
Because by that time I was going into the colleges. But I was aware of the fact that this was non-existent, you know, and I was also aware of the fact that the students that I was reaching out to and teaching were not interested in classical music. They were interested in the music that they were listening to, and they wanted to hear some validation of the value of that.
Right.
And that was easy for me to find because I'm making my living doing that.
Exactly.
You know, so a couple of times I remember I had a chance to do a record date with Donald Byrd. And so I took 5 of my students downtown. And Donald came back and walked with us across, you know, when we left, and he was talking and whatnot. And this was before, or during the time that he did, what was it, that he was teaching at Howard University. He had this great jazz group that came out of Howard University. I can't even remember the name of it. Oh, Donald Byrd and
the Blackbirds.
Blackbirds, that's what it was. Yeah. And we started seeing how these things were going on. And Max Roach was teaching up at UMass Amherst.
Yeah.
And somehow they constructed a African-American music program, a seminar. My youngest daughter was about like 7 or 8 years old. And I took her with me up to this thing.
Yeah.
We were up in the car, you know, and she looked at all the programs and stuff, and she was learning stuff. And we realized that there was an interest for this and nobody was doing it. So when I went back to Adelphi University, a friend of mine, Kim McIntyre, got a job teaching at SUNY Old Westbury.
Right.
All right. And so he needed some faculty. So he hired me right away to do the band and teach percussion. All right. Now I'm in heaven. You know. So what I had to do at that point was satisfy the state of New York Board of Education.
Right.
So I did a whole curriculum. I listed, like I said, the groups of pianists. I listed saxophone players, and I did a couple of other instruments. But then we started getting students coming in who had to be taught instrumental.
Right.
So we were teaching them, and we were forming bands. Not too many schools were forming bands at that time. You know, they weren't, they weren't doing anything that wasn't classical. And when we started this, all of a sudden it caught on. And at Old Westbury, we started a whole jazz program. We stayed there I retired after maybe 20 years. And what happened was they retrenched the program. In fact, that's why I retired, because I knew they were going to do that. But while they retrenched the program, they hired a young man, what's his boy's name? I should call him a boy, he's 60 or 70 by now. Bass player, I can't think of his name. And he went to one of the schools upstate, one of the SUNY schools upstate.
Right.
And started a jazz program up there. So they retrenched the one we had at Old Westbury and put all the funds into his program. He's still,
but it's the politics of education and how
then
things happen.
They took our program and disregarded it.
Yeah.
Right. So now it's time for me to retire.
Yeah.
All right, so
Yeah.
at that point I stopped teaching. But those students that I taught became professionals and started teaching the same way in their own situation.
Exactly.
You know?
Exactly.
So we planted the seed and then watched it grow, but we got extricated from seeing the evolution of it.
Yeah. Now, who are some of the favorite musicians you played with?
Oh man, Sam Rivers, saxophonist. He comes to my mind first because he was probably the most brilliant. I went all over the country, all over the world. We went to Europe touring with him. I'm trying to think of some of the other. Well, Ken McIntyre, of course.
Yeah.
You know, but he was more prominent as an educator than he was as a performer. But his name was as a performer.
Exactly. Exactly.
But man, I get calls from so many people, and mostly as a percussionist rather than a drummer, because they didn't have many black percussionists when I broke in.
Yeah.
You know, and to have somebody that could come in and understand what the music was. I remember I did a big band thing. It wasn't a big band, it was like a band of saxophone players. You know, instead of trumpets, we had sopranos.
Wow.
And the alto players, the tenors, and then the baritone and the bass saxophone. And the guy had written, oh man, a prominent composer. I'll think of his name. He had written something for timpani to accompany these jazz musicians. And that gave me another boost because it gave me a reputation among all those saxophone players, and it enhanced my, recording possibilities.
Yeah.
But it was a matter of culture.
Right.
You know.
Right. So now I have to ask you, because we're working to get a street name for the great drummer Max Roach, and I want you to talk a little bit about your relationship with him.
Well, Max, when I was a student, he came through several incidences where I was playing timpani, all right? And he saw that I had a pretty good technique, and that was something that was unusual among African Americans because we hadn't had those opportunities.
Opportunities,
you know?
Exactly.
So I had a studio down on 21st Street, maybe for about 30 years. And I had everything set up. So he started rehearsing his group every Thursday afternoon. I think I mentioned that before.
Yep.
And it got to the point where it was in the summertime, people would come across the roof and down the fire escape and sit on the fire escape and listen to this rehearsal every week. And of course, those of us who were there who knew about it, we were there listening. And somebody, my friend Anton Reed, who was working with me, said, you know what, we should start doing performances. So with Max being there, we started doing performances.
Yeah.
They came in, his quartet came in and did a couple. I had, I knew Alice Coltrane. I was teaching at Adelphi University. I got Alice to come in, and she wouldn't charge me. She came in and played a concert for my class, and she brought Reggie Workman and Ben Riley with her and paid them out of her pocket.
Yeah.
And, for the education. Well, all this helped us get the momentum to start African American music and African American music history. African American music history that they teach. African American culture that they teach.
Yeah.
And they come to us and study it. I've had people come from Europe to study with me to learn what we're doing, playing percussion, drumming, whatever. That distinction and the fact that they were unused to seeing a classical musician playing jazz or being able to play jazz and coordinate with other jazz musicians. So that was the fundamental of my career. That enabled me to raise my family. And,
right, exactly. So Warren Smith, I want to finally ask you about some of your experiences in being in the music industry. Some of the recording dates. Some of maybe some funny stories that you have being around this great music that we call jazz. I want you to give me some anecdotes, some stories that stay in your mind after all these years.
Wow. You have to give me a minute to think about that.
Well,
because I mean,
first and foremost, I want you to talk some about the experiences with Max Roach, playing with Joe Chambers.
Oh boy.
You know.
Now there. Oh, okay. Let's start with those two names.
Okay.
All right. Now we got 6 people in Boom Boom. All right.
Right.
Joe Chambers and Max, of course, Omar Clay, Freddie Waits, Ray Mantilla, and myself. Okay, that was the 6 of us.
Right.
Yeah. There was some other person that I can't remember. It'll come to me. But they're 2 big guys.
Yeah.
And they're 2 imposing figures. You know, they are aggressive. So, you know, we're sitting there and you know, there was a disagreement between the 2. You know, and we're in a little, like a 3rd story. It was a studio, it was a loft, you know,
right.
Open space. And so everybody else was smaller than them, so we just said, okay, how's it going to go next? And, okay, let's go out and settle. All right, let's go out and settle this. So we're all sitting back there, they go out the side door. About 5 minutes later, they both come in, laughing with their arms around each other. I knew what it was. Neither one of them wanted to get their ass kicked.
That's right. That's right.
So they just decided, well, this is silly, you know, and it was. But that was one of the funniest things because you very seldom would see Max leave his composure, leave what.
Right. Exactly.
You know, I mean, Max would get upset about certain things, and you see these muscles in his jaw, and all the cats say, all right, Max is chewing rocks again.
Yeah.
So when we knew that was going to come up, we'd either back down or just, you know, let it blow over.
Exactly.
And Joe pushed it. So, you know, but after that happened, then they both realized that it was both a bluff, you know?
Yeah.
But that was one of the funniest things you know, we were all waiting to, you know, have to go out and pick somebody up or something.
Yeah.
But none of that ever arose again. Now, we had some pretty crazy arguments, but they were usually about musical,
Right.
you know,
Right.
considerations.
Yeah.
Which was really interesting because Max had such high standards. That's another thing I would say.
Yeah.
All of us would bring in compositions. And they would rehearse my composition. I said, okay, that's cool. Max said, that's not cool. I don't like the way that little section there involved.
Right.
Let's work on that. You know, and then Joe would bring in a piece and stuff, and Max said, wait a minute, Joe, you need to, you know, and he pushed us all to be better, more proficient composers because he was seeing from a viewpoint that was outside of our spectrum.
Right.
You know?
Right.
And when we put this stuff into performance, everything just, you know, just went, you know, it was Max Roach's Cadillac.
Right.
Camp up in Massachusetts. And Max was playing at a bar. No, Randy Weston was playing at the bar. Max had done a concert, a jazz concert at Tangerville.
Right.
Which was one of the first ones. So when the concert was over, he went to this place across the street from Tangerville called Ever, where
Right.
Randy Weston both washed dishes during the day.
I've heard
and
Randy
then
Weston
played the
tell
piano,
those stories,
you know.
many times.
And so, you know, I went over there and started talking with Max. And then Max saw me play with the classical symphony, you know. And he saw that I had some technique on the timpani and all the other percussion instruments, and his mind was circulating.
Yeah.
So he started rehearsing every week in my studio with his quartet. And he looks around and sees the timpani and he sees, you know, this set of congas sitting over there and whatnot. So he recruited 6 of us, or 5 of us, you know, and had us come up on Thursday afternoons for a whole year. Like every Thursday. I think the only time we missed was during, you know, the winter, you know, Christmas vacations and
Right.
stuff like that.
Right.
But we only came I mean, nobody ever missed. You know, if Max was out of town on a gig, that was the one time we would miss it.
Right.
He was there every time. Maybe one of us might miss, you know, sometime or other.
But you stayed consistent.
Yeah. And by the time we finished, we had polished the whole repertoire.
Wow.
You know, so now everybody writes out their music, you know, and says what to do. Max wouldn't let us put music in front of the audience. He thought that was an obstacle between us and the audience.
Wow.
So what we had to do was go in there and rehearse every Thursday till we memorized.
To memorize the music.
All of our parts.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, I was playing everybody else's music, all up here. Everybody was playing my music, all up here.
Right.
And to this day, we don't use music.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
And you got that from Max Roach.
Yeah. I mean, it was his idea that would be an obstacle to prevent us from communicating with the orchestra.
Right.
I mean,
to have sheet music
with the audience.
Exactly. To have sheet music on the bandstand.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's interesting.
I'll tell you a story. One day, when I was in the Cub Scouts, the Cub Scout leader said, "All right, boys, sit down." Yeah, we saw us sit down. He said, "Now, put your hands on your knees." He said, "We're going to create a rainstorm." And he said, "Now, everybody close your eyes and start patting your thighs." You see, when 6 or 8 of us are doing this, then all of a sudden, you heard this, man, it's like rain.
Exactly.
So I took this into Ubun's rehearsal one day, and Max wouldn't let us sit down. And the first time we did it, we sat down, but then he refined it. He made us do it here.
Right.
So we go in front of the microphone, you know, and everybody's, and pretty soon, people in the audience. I remember one day we were at an outdoor concert. We were doing this piece where we started a rainstorm, and Thad Jones and Mel Lewis's band was coming in from the outside. They were coming around where we were rehearsing, and the guys heard it, and they started putting on their caps and raving. You know? And when they got there, they saw, it's because it went from here, where everybody would take a pair of brushes and play on the drum here, very softly. And then it got to the point where Roy Brooks would go over to the bass drum and take a beater and rumble like thunder.
Yeah, and I watched you perform that at the Kennedy Center.
That's right. Yeah,
I watched you perform that. Yeah,
and I mean we worked as much on choreography and presentation as we did on the music.
Yeah.
You know, so it was really, you know, I mean, we just took it out from there. Somebody decided, well, a clash of thunder, you know, so somebody, you know.
Exactly.
And people outside would really think that we had created this storm, you know, but it was such a lesson to us to realize how far our imaginations could take an audience.
Absolutely. So Warren Smith, I want to thank you so very much for your time. You told some great stories.
Thank you.
You are a wonderful educator, and I think that speaks volumes, because when we have people who are great performers, people who have traveled all over the world performing this great music and also can teach this great music, and I think it's an honor to be in your presence. It's an honor to hang out with you, and it's a great pleasure to having the time to sit down and discuss your history, your journey, and all the things that you've done in this music. I want to thank you very much for your time.
Can I say one more thing?
You most certainly can.
What I have, how should I say it? My ambition is to share this.
Yes.
With other younger people, because there's still more to do. There's a lot more for us, you know. And people like us, if we share this is going to inspire the younger people to keep giving, and to keep growing. You know? So I hope that this will reach a few more people in the future.
It will. And again, Warren, thank you very much.
Well.